Welcome to this series in which I'm going to be reading to you from my book, and I'm reading specifically from the glossary at the back of the book. And the glossaries, generally are considered a kind of the domain of the researcher, not in the sense that something that you read and take in. So this glossary is different. It's called the Glossary of Personal Empowerment, and it's a very potent, growing glossary. The terms in here are the terms that underlie the whole gene keys. So as we enter into those terms and we understand them one by one, so they become very potent inside us, because as we learn to listen to them and imbibe them, we're literally retraining our mental body to see things in a different way. So I'm going to pick one at random each time I do this, and the first one I'm going to pick is from the beginning. It's the very word archetype. It's a nice one to begin with, archetype. I'm going to read them and we'll contemplate them together. Archetype, a compressed idea containing many dimensions of meaning, imagery, and feeling. Archetypes resonate with deep universal themes in the unconscious of all human beings, regardless of race, genetics, or conditioning. According to the Gene Keys, there are exactly 64 universal archetypes. When you continuously contemplate and identify with a particular archetype, it has the capacity to transform your state of consciousness from a low frequency to a high frequency. Very simple definition of an archetype, but a lot of things to consider. A compressed idea containing many dimensions of meaning, imagery, and feeling. An archetype is something that connects those areas of our being, the feeling body, the astral body, and the mental body, and also the physical body. In Gene Keys terms, it's what we call the lower trinity. So it actually weaves together these three layers of our being that we live in, the physicality of our lives, the emotions that we feel as we go about our lives, and the thoughts that pin it all together. An archetype has the potential to kind of unite all three of those, and in uniting them, to transcend them. That's its purpose. So archetypes resonate with deep universal themes. Wherever you look, archetype was a word coined by Carl Jung, but archetypes have been around since language has been around, and before language was around. That's the nature of the archetype. The archetype takes us to the wordless domain. It takes us beyond words. It takes us beyond thought. It takes us beyond feeling. So it is a means of transport, of celestial transport. The Gene Keys are a set of archetypes. They are the archetypes underpinning creation. And because of the formula embedded in the Gene Keys, these 64 archetypes, the suggestion is that those are the primary archetypes of all being, and you can condense those down. You can condense the 64 into 16, and you can condense those 16 into 4, and then you can even contain those 4 into 3 and then 1. So there are ways of kind of organizing archetypes, but the 64 seems to be embedded in so many things. In my introductory materials, you learn about that. The 64 is the foundation of our genetic code. It's the foundation of the architecture of life and nature and music and everything that stitches together the cosmos. So, according to the Gene Keys, there are exactly 64. And each one of the Gene Keys is one of those. So if you take the Gene Key 62 and you contemplate that, you're actually contemplating an entire stream of information, data, that leads you into the past and the future. There are many, many archetypes, gods, deities, stories, discoveries, scientific, intuitive, that are kind of compressed in each one of these Gene Keys. So as we begin to enter into a contemplation of a gene key, we're going into that storyline, we're going into that mythology, we're going into that encyclopedia of information that it's more than information, it's cellular, it's light, is what it is. It's light that is waiting to be released. And of course, the basis of understanding an archetype is that it has the capacity for transformation, to transform your state of consciousness from a low frequency to a high frequency. And part of that is to understand the nature of an archetype. So a dream, for example, you have a nightmare. You're grappling with an archetype in your unconscious. These are embedded in our unconscious. It says here, deep universal themes lodged in the unconscious of all human beings, regardless of race, genetics, or conditioning. They transcend all that. So when you look at the creation myths of all humans, you see that they have similar storylines. And you see the archetypes. There are only a few archetypes, but they repeat over and over and over again through different cultures. So they transcend language patterns and thought patterns and race, and they transcend how we identify things on the outside. So they allow us to actually come into unity. So the purpose of these archetypes really deeply is to go through transformation. If you identify with the archetype, then you go into a kind of struggle with the archetype. So the part of the process, and that's necessary, that's part of the shadow of the transforming the shadow of the archetype and letting it go and moving it through your being. So in that dream, perhaps you are fully identified with that archetype, that whatever it was, that horror, that fear, that then became a symbol. It might be a snake or a kind of cataclysm or something, that threatens you, that's moving through your unconscious. And then as you bring it out and you begin to identify it in your everyday life, perhaps it's in your relationships, perhaps it's a belief system lodged in you from childhood or even before, it's ancestral in some way. It's deeper than that even. And so your purpose is to then move these through and to identify them and let go of them. And that's the process of working with the gene keys. It's what it's all about, to shift the frequency. The frequency is how we hold the archetype. So if we and how we allow it to hold us. So if we allow it to hold us, then it holds us at the shadow frequency. It holds us at a low frequency, and our beliefs kind of create that situation so that the archetype repeats in our life in a loop, and it keeps challenging us, and we keep meeting those experiences where the archetype comes alive, and we struggle with it until we see what it is truly, and then we're able to let go of it. And then and that's a process in itself, the acceptance of the archetype, and then the transformational process as we let it go. And as we let it go, then our frequency shifts and we become more buoyant. We literally go up a layer. We've dropped some baggage that we brought to this karma that we brought with us. So the process of transforming archetypes is the process of the transmutation of karma. So it's really important to understand what an archetype is, and if you're learning about the gene keys, to really understand that every gene key is an archetypal window. It is a lens, and if you go deeply into that lens, you will find all the stories and all the myths and all the ghouls and demons and all the angels, and all of those things are embedded in each one of them. And as we expand our understanding of the gene keys and the different correspondences, we get to see all that being played out, and we get to see it around us, and then the gene keys become this pantheon that enables us to identify archetypes and therefore move through them and transform them more easily. And that's the road to freedom. So, a nice one to begin with.